This is the story of a moment that defied belief. This is the story of courage that stood tall when all hope seemed lost. This is the story of a woman whose name many would forget, but whose heroism etched itself into the hearts of soldiers and civilians alike. This is the story we bring to you on Her World Stories, and if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss stories of bravery that changed the course of history. The dust had barely settled, and the silence that followed was not peaceful. It was thick with the cries of the wounded, the groans of the exhausted, and the distant echo of enemy artillery. The sky was a haunting gray, carrying the bitter scent of smoke and fear. For weeks this battlefield, a desolate stretch of rocky terrain, scarred by conflict, had been a killing ground. But on this day, it would become the proving ground for a shot no one thought possible. Her name was Lieutenant Marisol Vega. She was not the tallest, nor the loudest, but there was a depth in her eyes that spoke of strength tempered by hardship. Born in a small mountain town surrounded by stark beauty and harsher winters, she grew up learning resilience from the land itself. Her village was one where the wind could bite through clothes and the earth remained frozen long after everyone had gone inside. But it was also a place where stories of courage were told beside warm fires, stories of ancestors who stood firm against overwhelming odds. Marisol carried those stories with her. They were her compass when the world fell into war, guiding her steps into the very heart of danger. When her country called, she answered without hesitation. She joined the marksman unit, not because she sought glory, but because she understood the burden of responsibility, that some people must step forward when others cannot. On that fateful day, her unit was tasked with holding a strategic ridge. It was a narrow line of defense that, if lost, would open a gateway for the enemy to sweep through and overrun the base camp where hundreds of soldiers and civilians had taken shelter. They knew the position was difficult to defend. Too many routes for the enemy to advance, too little cover, and reinforcements miles away. But retreat was not an option. For days they held the ridge, enduring relentless attacks. Mortars fell like thunder, cutting through the air and bursting into deadly showers of metal. The enemy knew what was at stake and pressed harder with every wave. One by one, men fell. Some collapsed from exhaustion, others from wounds that refused to show mercy. But for all their training, for all their discipline, they were losing ground inch by inch. Marisol was there among them, her rifle never leaving her side. She was not a commander by rank, but her calm under fire made others look to her for reassurance. She would offer a brief nod, a steadying hand on a shoulder, and then turn back to the fight. That was who she was, steady as stone, quiet as the dawn before the sun breaks. As the sun climbed toward midday, the enemy launched a decisive assault. A fresh battalion had joined their ranks, and they moved with a ferocity that pushed Marisol's unit to the brink. Communication lines were cut, radios rendered useless by interference or destruction. There was confusion, cries for help that went unanswered, and a rising sense that this fight might be the one that broke them. Somewhere in the chaos, Marisol heard a crackle, faint, but unmistakable. A single channel flickered to life. It was a distress call from the base below. The words were hurried, fear lacing every syllable. Reinforcements had been ambushed. They were pinned down. They needed cover fire, and they needed it now. But there was no way to support them. Every available soldier at the base was tied up trying to hold a perimeter against the approaching enemy. The only hope was to strike at the advancing forces with precision that defied distance. They needed a shot, and not just any shot. They needed a shot that could ripple through the enemy formation and give those trapped below a sliver of hope. It was at that moment that the impossible became real in Marisol's mind. She checked her gear. Her rifle was custom-made, a marksman's weapon designed for precision at long ranges. It was a beautiful piece of engineering, balanced yet deadly, elegant yet merciless. She looked at her fellow soldiers, some still fighting, others lying wounded. She could see the weight of despair in their eyes. It was then she knew what she had to do. The target was a key artillery unit hidden behind a ridge nearly 2,900 meters away. If they could neutralize it, the enemy's momentum might falter. But hitting a target at that distance was considered near impossible, even for the most skilled snipers. The wind currents, the uneven terrain, the fatigue, every factor stacked against success. Yet Marisol stepped forward. She called out to her squad leader, "I'm going to take the shot." There was no hesitation in her voice, only an unshakable resolve. Some protested. Others tried to dissuade her. But when someone carries certainty in their voice, it has a way of quieting doubt. She was given a nod, a mixture of fear and admiration in equal measure. Marisol found her position behind a large boulder, unstable ground beneath her boots. She settled into a prone stance, the rifle's barrel pointing toward the horizon. The air was thin, dry, and cold. Every breath felt like inhaling shards of glass. She closed her eyes for a moment, focusing not on the distance, but on the reason she was making this shot. She thought of her comrades fighting below, of the faces of the wounded, of the children huddled in the base camp who didn't belong in this war at all. Then she opened her eyes and exhaled, letting go of everything that was not necessary. She adjusted the scope, calibrated the windage, accounted for gravity drop, and steadied her breathing. Time seemed to slow as she pulled the trigger. What happened next was a silence so profound that even the wind seemed to pause. The bullet sailed through the air, a whisper of metal against the gray sky, traveling across jagged ridges, valleys carved by years of erosion, and the distant silhouettes of enemy fighters who had no idea what fate was heading toward them. And then, impact. The artillery unit erupted in chaos and fire. The shot struck with such precision that it disabled the weapon and stunned those operating it. In that moment, the advance faltered. Enemy troops staggered, confusion rippled through their ranks, and the momentum they had built crumbled like dry stone. Back on the ridge, Marisol's squad members watched in disbelief. Some let out breathless cries, others sank to their knees overcome with relief. The impossible had happened, and while it was only one shot, it was enough to shift the balance. That single moment breathed life back into the defenders, giving them the window they needed to reorganize, aid the wounded, and slow the enemy's advance. News of what she had done spread through the camp below and reached even those who were exhausted, frightened, and on the verge of surrender. They spoke of a woman, standing alone against impossible odds, and hitting her mark when the world had given up hope. It became more than a tactical victory, it became a symbol of resilience. Medics worked through the night, tending to the wounded. Soldiers stood guard, weary but vigilant. Marisol remained on the ridge, watching as the base below stirred. With new energy, she didn't seek praise. She didn't want parades or medals. She simply wanted her comrades to live, to see another sunrise, and to know that courage doesn't always roar, sometimes it whispers through a single decisive act. In the days that followed, the ridge was fortified with fresh troops who managed to secure supply lines. The base camp was reinforced. Writers, historians, and reporters tried to pin down exactly what had happened, but no account could fully capture the tension, the fear, and the clarity that had come over Marisol in those critical moments. They tried to describe the physics of the shot, the wind speeds, the angle, the trajectories, but those were just numbers. What mattered was the heart behind the shot. Marisol returned to the camp one evening, long after the fighting had quieted. She walked slowly, boots weighed down with dust and exhaustion. Soldiers greeted her not with awe, but with smiles tinged with respect. They offered water, food, and a place by the fire. And there, under the faint glow of embers, stories began to weave themselves around her name. One soldier said he saw her eyes when she took the shot, how they were calm as though she was comforting an old friend rather than facing overwhelming odds. Another said the shot echoed in their hearts long after the sound faded from the ridge. Mothers whispered her name to their children as a bedtime story of strength. Fathers spoke of her as the embodiment of courage. And somewhere in the middle of these narratives, many would say that what she did was not just a mark of skill, but a demonstration of love, love for her country, her people, and the belief that no matter how dark the night, dawn could still break. The war eventually reached a turning point. Battles were won, peace negotiations began, and the echoes of conflict faded into cautious optimism. Yet, long after the front lines were quiet, the story of Lieutenant Marisol Vega, the woman who fired the impossible shot at 2,900 meters, remained alive. It wasn't just a tale of military genius or strategic brilliance. It was a story about the human spirit, about how one person, with clarity of purpose and courage unbounded by fear, can shift the course of events and save countless lives. And that, dear viewers of Her World Stories, is the power of hope. It reminds us that heroes aren't born from invincibility, but from vulnerability transformed into action. They are ordinary people who, in extraordinary moments, choose to stand when others falter. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of hope and courage in every word, then make sure you support our channel. Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and join us as we bring more stories of remarkable individuals whose lives challenge the limits of what we think is possible. Because every story matters, every voice has a journey, and every one of us carries a spark that can light the darkest night. Thank you for listening to this incredible tale of sacrifice, bravery, and the shot that defied impossibility. Until our next story, stay courageous, stay curious, and always remember that the world is full of unsung heroes waiting to be discovered.